Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. So welcome to those in attendance at this remote meeting of the local review body of Aberdeen City Council on Monday the 25th of April 2022. Please note the meeting will be recorded and published online for public access after the meeting. We will also have external people joining the meeting to observe through Teams. Please note that the external people should not switch on their cameras or their microphones at any point during the meeting. Can all members leave their cameras on but mute their microphones when not speaking? The microphone should only be switched on when you're invited to speak. As the local review body contains quasi-judicial business, members are reminded they should not leave the meeting during their consideration of any application. The meeting has been convened in response to 4 requests for a review of the decision taken by the appointed officer under the Council scheme of delegation. Members of the local review body have before them copies of the review documents as listed in the notice calling the meeting. I will now ask Ms McBain, the Assistant Clerk, to outline the procedure to which we will follow to conduct these reviews and also check the members in attendance. Over to you, Ms McBain.
Thank you, Convener. So just for the recording, if members can just indicate that they're present. So Convener.
Here.
Councillor Bell.
Present.
And Councillor Hendrickson.
Present.
Thank you. So I'll just quickly run through the procedure note. So members have the procedure note, which was circulated with the meeting papers and is intended to set out the wider framework within which the review process operates. From this, it is clear that the first task for the review body is to come to a decision on whether the review documents contain sufficient information for the case to be determined without further procedure, and by that it is meant without further information or representations. To assist, I feel it would be helpful to mention the following. Firstly, that the regulations governing the local review process require that all matters which the applicant intends to raise in the review must be set out in or accompany the notice of review. Secondly, that the focus of the review should be on the basis of what was before the appointed officer when a decision was made, and only in exceptional circumstances will new additional matters be permitted to be taken into account. Thirdly, to note that the modernisation of the planning system, which included revisal of the planning appeals process, of which this local review body is part, removed the previous right on the part of an applicant to insist on a hearing and replaced that with the LRB, providing them with the power to choose a procedure which more accurately reflects the facts and circumstances of the individual case. And lastly, that guidance issued by the Scottish Government's Chief Planner stated that reviews by LRBs should be conducted by means of full consideration of the application afresh. This review should take the form of a structured discussion led by the Chair to consider the matter set out in the notice of review before you, and I would conclude by drawing your attention in particular to points 10 to 12 of the procedure note. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms McBain. We'll now turn to consideration of the first review in respect of the decision to refuse the application for the erection of raised decking with balustrade to the rear of at 12 Wood Hill Place, Aberdeen, application 210851. We'll now hear from the planning advisor, Mr Gavin Evans, who will provide us with a brief description of the application proposal. I would point out that Mr Evans attends today's meeting to provide us with the necessary professional planning guidance because he has not been involved in the earlier consideration of the application under review. Mr Evans, however, will not be asked to express any views on the merits of the proposed development, and in effect his role will be a neutral one involving the provision of factual information and guidance only. So with that, I'll just hand over to Mr Evans.
Thank you, Chair. If you could just bear with me a second, members, I'll just share my screen for the presentation here.
Thank you. It's there. Thank you.
Super. Okay, so thank you and good morning, everyone. So as you said, Chair, before us, first of all, we have a request for review against an application refused under delegated powers. This was for the erection of raised decking with a balustrade to the rear of 12 Wood Hill Place. The review was found to have been submitted with all of the necessary information and within the time limit of 3 months following the appointed officer's decision. Just flick on to the location plan there. Based on the notice of review form that was provided, no new matters have been raised by the applicant, However, the applicant has requested that further procedure is undertaken by way of a site inspection specifically, advising that this is required to give proper appreciation for the site and that photographs alone don't really do it justice, aren't sufficient. So I'll just flick through these slides for a quick description of the site first and foremost. The application site forms part of a established residential area and comprises a residential plot featuring a semi-detached 1.5-storey dwelling and its associated front, side and rear gardens. The property has been extended to the rear, so that's the east, by way of a 2-storey extension. Flick through there, you've just got the aerial view. You can see the driveway comes down the side of the property here to the rear. And that's the 2-storey extension that we're just referring to. The front elevation, which I don't think I actually have a picture of because the works are all to the rear, fronts onto Woodhill Place, while residential properties bound the site on the north, south and east sides. The property shares a mutual driveway, which you can just see in that aerial view, and then again in the mapping shot, with number 10 Woodhill Place, which is just immediately next door. In terms of ground levels, the site slopes down gradually from west to east, so that's from front to back, resulting in a basement level at the rear of the dwelling. And the photographs really show that best. So from street level, you're looking at sort of 1.5-storey sort of bungalow type property with dormers, and then at the rear you have this additional basement level. Just some other photos illustrating that change in level. So you can see on the left-hand image there the way in which the driveway drops down to the back of the property. Worth noting the sort of fairly mature, dense Lelandii hedge along the boundary with the adjoining neighbour there, relevant in terms of privacy. And this is a photo taken from the bottom of that shared driveway. So this is looking at the neighbouring property at number 10. This one is taken at the boundary with number 14. So again, you can see the sort of dense hedging along the boundary there. And this is just showing Woodhill Terrace, I think it is. So if we flick back to the street plan, yeah. So this is taken essentially from that little corner in there, if you can see my cursor, and just looking out towards the street and the gap through the trees. This image is taken from Woodhill Terrace, albeit just a note of caution, this is a Google image from Street View, which is dated 2014, so the extent of tree cover and things may not be exactly as shown there. So right, onto the proposal. Detailed planning permission in this application was sought for the erection of a raised area of decking to the rear, so we've got an existing plan on the left and proposed on the right. So you can see the extent of the decking sought here. Sorry, my cursor's flicking around a little bit. So that'll be accessed via the kitchen at the rear of the property. That's at ground floor level in the rear extension that we saw. The decking would project 2.4 metres from the rear face of the extension, measure 6.65 metres wide, and is elevated 2.4 metres above the garden level. So that's less when you see it in the context of this sloping driveway because there's a retaining wall there. And it will be enclosed by a 1.1 metre high timber balustrade. This is just a ground floor plan that shows you the same thing slightly zoomed in, so you can see how the kitchen with a sliding patio door there opens out onto the decking. It's got a balustrade around it on all 3 sides, and then this blue line here is indicating a 1.8 metre high sort of glazed but sort of frosted glazing, I imagine, privacy screen, which was added when I think the appointed officer raised issues about privacy from the deck. So this was an attempt to try and address that. The decking itself would be formed using natural stained timber. Just flick through some other images here. This is the first floor plan, which really just acts as a roof plan, and you can see the extent of the decking there. Sections, quite useful where there's any change in levels involved. So as existing on the top image, and then as proposed on the bottom image. So you can see from the sort of driveway level that that elevation is about 1.2, 1.27, I think that says, meters. But then when you see that same view from the garden level, you see it's a more pronounced change from the actual garden itself. Just a side view there again, so you can see the manner in which it's elevated up, and then the glazed screen along one edge, but not the other. Cross sections through, really just showing the same thing effectively, I'm afraid. So turning to the appointed officer's reasons for the refusal. These are included in the decision notice, which forms part of the agenda pack today. Makes the following points. Whilst the design, materials and finish of the deck was recognised as according with the provisions of policy D1, the proposal was found to fall foul of policy H1 relating to residential areas and the associated householder development guide, supplementary guidance. And that was on the basis of adverse impact on residential amenity coming from overlooking and a loss of privacy within adjoining rear gardens. It was also felt that the proposal would be similarly contrary to the emerging policies of the proposed local development plan, so just flagging up that there's no fundamental change envisaged in policy that would be more receptive to this proposal. Turning then to the applicant's case and the points raised in support. Again, that's included in the agenda pack, just picked out the sort of key messages. Firstly, highlights that the appointed officer's report considered that the raised deck would be of suitable design and material finish, so it wasn't refused, across the board as failing to comply with all policies. Notes that the reasons for refusal do relate to a perceived failure to comply with policy H1, as well as the policies in the proposed plan, and contends that the screen, the glazed privacy screen, was added in an effort to minimise overlooking from the deck, albeit that wasn't seen as being sufficient to address the appointed officer's concerns. Next slide's on to policy, so I'll come back to that afterwards. In terms of consultations, the local Rosemount Mile End Community Council stated no objection. And there were no representations made from any neighbours or other members of the public. At that point, convener, I'll just hand back to you for members to decide if you think a site visit or any other procedures necessary. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Evans. Before we have that discussion, is it possible, Mr. Evans, for you to take up the sort of the Google Maps so we can zoom into the sort of the overhead view, just to give me an indication of the area? That would be helpful just before I ask members what they want to do. Thank you.
Take me a second here. Is this the sort of 3D modelled view that you're thinking of?
Well, it was we saw a static picture from Google Earth, I think it was, looking down on the wider area. It was just to be able, if you could take a live one, that you could zoom in a little bit, because you couldn't really see anything on that one, well, of any detail.
Yeah. Zoomed out.
You start asking me about 3D ones, like, you confuse me, Gavin.
Just ignore the red dot there. It seems to be a little bit off cue. So this is the application property that we're talking about here.
It's not
identified by the pink driveway.
You haven't shared it.
Oh, sorry, I'm just looking at that myself then, am I?
Yeah.
That's a good start. There we are. That might be a bit better.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay. So the property is, let's have a look, is the one with the red balloon above it.
No, it's not, I'm afraid.
That's what I was thinking. Why is it so rude?
No, Google's sometimes a little bit off. It's the other side of the road here. It's the one with the pink driveway sloping down to the rear, and it's the sort of second in from Woodhill Terrace.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. That's more helpful. Okay. Does anybody need any zooming in or out from that picture, or are you happy? Okay, yeah, fine. Right, thank you, Gavin. That's helpful. I just wanted to get an overview.
Problem.
Okay, members, you'll obviously have heard that the applicant felt that to give due consideration that a site visit might be worthwhile. I just need to know, members, whether you wish to have a site visit or if you feel content that you have sufficient information to make a determination today. Councillor Bell?
Oh, I have enough information, thank you, Camina.
Okay, Councillor Henriksen?
Yeah, I'm happy. I've got a couple of questions, but overall I'm happy.
Yeah, and equally, I think we've got sufficient information to make a determination today. So with that, unanimous, we'll move on then. Thank you very much. Mr. Evans, if you could then, given we feel we've got sufficient information, if you could then take us through the relevant policies and other considerations. Thank you.
So yes, thank you, Chair. Just turning then to the relevant policy considerations from the local development plan first and foremost. Policy D1 applies as it does to all development, setting out an expectation that development will be of a high standard of design, which demonstrates an understanding of its context and links to these 6 essential qualities. So some of those more applicable to larger scale development, some applicable here. As I mentioned, this application site is in a predominantly residential area. That's reflected in its zoning and the local development plan, where policy H1 applies and sets out a number of tests for new development. Firstly, does this proposal represent overdevelopment? You might argue that the sort of internal footprint of the dwelling itself isn't increasing. This is really just an outdoor area akin to a patio or something like that. So the second criteria is, would the development have an unacceptable impact on the character and amenity of the area? So it's for members to consider what you feel the character and amenity of the area is at present, to what extent it's sensitive to change through this proposal. Thirdly, would it result in the loss of valuable and valued areas of open space? Because we're within a private residential curtilage, there's no public open space affected, so that one's not applicable. And lastly, would it comply with the relevant supplementary guidance? I'll come back to the householder development guide and the sort of criteria that it sets out just in a moment. In fact, it's the next slide. So the householder development guide sets out firstly a series of sort of general principles that apply to all domestic additions. Firstly, proposals should be architecturally compatible with the original house and the surrounding area in terms of design, scale, that sort of thing. And so there's a judgment there in terms of how sympathetic you feel this is. Obviously, it's using timber being a sort of external deck, so it's not really intended to match the materials of the house, and it is located to the rear, so the effect on the sort of wider areas reduced as a result. Proposals should not dominate or overwhelm the original house and should remain visually subservient. As I mentioned, it's located to the rear, so in terms of street frontage, streetscape, it's not introducing any major change. You might want to consider how visible it would be from Woodhill Terrace, albeit the image I was able to show you from Google Street View can't really be relied upon because it's quite old. Proposals should not result in a situation where the amenity of neighbouring properties would be adversely affected, for example, through loss of privacy, daylight, or general amenity. This seems to be the sort of central tenet of the refusal, really, is on amenity and overlooking privacy grounds. Judgment for members on the extent to which that is sort of fatal in terms of the application. The officer's report concluded that the deck would not result in any loss of daylight to habitable room windows, and the officer was satisfied that the position and orientation of the deck is such that there wouldn't be excessive overshadowing of adjoining rear gardens either. However, it did conclude that the open nature of gardens at numbers 10 and 12 Woodhill Place is such that the proposed decking would result in an unacceptable degree of overlooking, and a loss of privacy. Whilst the applicant had, as I mentioned, proposed to install a 1.8 metre high glazed screen to the southern extent of the deck to mitigate overlooking, the officer's report concluded that this wouldn't be sufficient to satisfactorily address the issue. I think if I can just go back to one of these views, this one perhaps shows it best. Because the screening is only going along that end, that's fine in terms of anybody sitting at this end of the deck, but because it's quite wide, occupying most of the width of the property, it does little to really prevent overlooking from the remainder of the deck. And I think that's the point that was coming through from the officer's report. So back onto the householder guide. Sets out that approvals that predate this guidance shouldn't be taken as representing a precedent. I don't think any have been raised in this particular case. The footprint of a dwelling as extended should not exceed twice that of the original. Again, no real extension in the traditional sense proposed here. No more than 50% of the front or rear curtilage should be covered by development. Again, not extending the footprint of the house itself. The deck effectively is acting as an alternative to soft landscape garden, similar to the way that a patio might. So then, specific to decking, the householder development guide does state that proposals should not result in an adverse impact on the amenity of adjacent dwellings, including both internal accommodation and external private amenity space. I think there's a recognition in the guidance that, you know, with decking proposals, it is first and foremost a privacy issue that is usually the main consideration there. And that's it as far as the policy summary is concerned, members. So really just summing up, in terms of zoning, do you feel that the proposal satisfies those tests we went through for policy H1 residential areas, specifically on the unacceptable impact on the character or amenity? And design terms, are you satisfied that the proposal is of appropriate design quality, having regard for factors like scale, siting, footprint, materials, that sort of thing? And would it accord with the relevant principles set out in the householder development guide, including its specific commentary on decking? So really just looking to come to an overall conclusion on whether you feel the proposal complies with the development plan when read as a whole, and whether there are any other factors that weigh either for or against approval. I'm happy to take any questions or advise as you like. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Evans. Councillor Hendrickson, you indicated you had questions, so we'll start with yourself.
Yes. Quick one on the glass screen. What sort of glass would that be? Would it be frosted glass or something like that? Is that what we're looking at?
I think that's the expectation, Councillor Henriksen. I don't believe it's been detailed, you know, to a specific product at this point. So that's the sort of thing that, where members minded to approve, you might want to see further details of, just to make sure that it's fit for the intended purpose. With these things, there are sort of categories of obscuration, if that's a word, that you can get for, you know, bathroom windows and panels like this, to make sure it's doing the job that it needs to.
And I've got one question regarding the photographs in the pack, specifically the ones of the neighbour. They're called photos neighbour 10. I've got a couple of questions on those photographs. So the main one I've got is, with the one that's looking into the garden, not up the driveway, but across the driveway, looking down into the garden. Do we have indication of what sort of level that photograph was taken at?
Do you want us to pull the picture back up?
Yeah.
Sorry, yes, that's a good idea. I'll just share
because
my
my
screen
black
there,
and white
Councillor
copy is
Henriksen.
not very
So
good.
I think you're talking about this one.
That's the one. Yeah. I'm interested in what sort of position the photograph was taken. Would we consider that as being the height of the decking, or would that be below the decking?
Sure. That would be below the decking. I mean, I couldn't say for certain at what level it was taken from, but my assumption is that that's taken from just standing on the pink surfaced driveway that you see there. Because it's a shared driveway, there's a degree of sort of openness between these two plots, I think. But if we use the neighbour's flat roofed extension just in this image as a guide, I think it's likely that the applicant's property is at a similar kind of level. So realistically, we'd be up here somewhere.
Right. So at that point, is the decking proposed to be higher than that surface, or at the same level, or does that where it extends out from?
The decking, in terms of its projection from the property, do you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. This plan perhaps shows that best. So this is number 10 on the right, and I think that's the flat roofed extension we were looking at. So the decked area is actually, you know, pushed out somewhat further into the garden, if you see what I mean.
Right. So it extends quite a distance beyond the. I was looking at. Sorry, this is not making much sense. But I'm looking at the photographs. I'm getting the impression that the plans that the back wall of the current extensions on both of them are aligned. Is that correct?
I'm not sure whether this plan at number 10 is truly faithful, so I just want to have a quick look at hopefully the other images we have. Yeah, see this view from the council's own mapping software would suggest that you're right. You know, they're just about in alignment, you know, not far off, whereas the plan that's been submitted as the site plan indicates something smaller there. So I don't know if it's that number 10's extension's a more recent addition. Does that help at all?
Yeah. Just one other question. The garden in number the one next door, is that dropped down a further level next to the driveway? Am I seeing that right? That it's actually lower than the driveway?
Is this at number 10 still?
Yes. Yeah.
I think there we go. I'm not sure to what extent there's a drop from the level of the driveway. It does look like there is, yeah, because you've got steps down from that path.
Yeah.
At the central part. So I think this must be a retaining wall that you know we're just seeing over the edge of there, and this is gradually going down.
Right. So just one other question. I don't think you'd be able to give me a specific answer. So the height of the decking above the garden next door would be quite considerable. Looking at it.
Yeah, I think it's likely that the driveway is sort of, you know, gradually dropping down from the frontage of the properties. It's likely that the level of the garden here is probably around about the same as the level of the garden within here. And we did have a section of the applicant's property that showed that reasonably well. In here, yeah, that image there is perhaps best.
Right. Thank you. That's it for the moment.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bell, have you any questions?
I do. Thank you. Can I please ask? So the screen it'll be translucent, so it'll allow light, but it'll be sort of sort of frosted, as it were. But has anybody actually done any wind load calculations on it? Because the prevailing weather will be coming from that direction. There'll be what's called an overturning moment. There'll be huge forces. Do you know if that has been looked at by the
I don't
architect?
believe there's anything in the planning application pack, certainly. Whether that would be captured by the building warrant process, I couldn't say for certain, but it's generally the case that the building warrant process is more looking at the sort of nuts and bolts and structural stability of things rather than the planning.
Okay, so clearly that sums would be done on that, because because my concern there would be that the wind forces. We've had some wild weather recently, but in any case, prevailing weather will just have a huge overturning moment on this structure, and it would just I think it would actually destroy it. But so carrying on from that, so the Leylandi hedge, which I think is number 14, between 12 and 14. Whose hedge is that? Is it number 12 or number 14?
Actually, in closer inspection, I'm not sure it is a Leylandia. Actually, I'm just looking at some of the other photographs here, but it looks to be on the other side of the fence. So I
Okay.
think it must be number 14's. But you know,
Okay.
I'm just sort of guessing at that, really.
Yeah, because looking at it, I mean, there are the pictures. There's extensive shadows. So I was just wondering if that neighbour might, or somebody might decide to take the hedge down, which they can do. The High Hedge Act allows them to. You would lose that screening, wouldn't you?
Yes, this can be a bit of an issue with landscaping, where we're making planning decisions. We sort of make them on the basis of what's in front of us. But as you know, to take down bushes and trees will in many cases not require any prior approval from the planning authority, which means that the relationship as far as privacy is concerned can be fundamentally changed.
Yeah, yeah, because because it's noticeable that they're relying on that hedge for screening, as opposed to putting up one of those translucent screens on that side of the decking, aren't they?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. That's really all I wanted to ask. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Henderson, any further questions from yourself?
No, I'm fine. Thank you.
Okay. I haven't actually got any questions at this point. Okay, in accordance with the procedure notes circulated, the local review body will now discuss and decide the manner in which the review is to proceed. I would highlight that all representations relating to the case have been considered and taken into account. So Councillor Hendrickson and Councillor Bell will obviously have our now discussion around the merits of the application and whether we wish to support the officer or overturn the decision. Maybe if you want, I can kick off, or I mean, I didn't have any questions because I felt the information in front of me was quite clear. And I think the point that you made, Councillor Bell, in terms of asking about the Leylandi or the green screening, whatever you want to call it, I think it's quite important that it is in ownership, if you like, of number 14, because it's their amenity that needs the protecting, because clearly number 12 are choosing to do or to have the sort of the outward terrace. So I think that's quite important. I think on the other side, the points you're raising about the piece of glass, that will come, I would imagine, under building standards. But again, we can specify that materials, etc., would be as part of a condition. And I think the fact that we have a driveway that then crosses over before you even get to the next door neighbours, I'm actually reasonably comfortable with this application as it is, with certain conditions in terms of providing details of the glass panel, because I think it is important to have that there. And I say it because the Community Council had originally put in an objection but withdrew it, which suggests to me they were then satisfied. The fact that neither residents on either side of the property have objected to it. People will use their gardens in many ways. You could have kids bouncing up and down on a trampoline, and some people might feel that invades their privacy far more than somebody sitting, maybe having their breakfast on a terrace when the weather allows. So to be honest, I'm actually comfortable to overturn the officer's recommendation at this stage with the guidance from Mr. Evans in terms of appropriate conditions. Councillor Bell.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mr. Evans, you popped your hand up. Sorry, do you need to?
Sorry to step in, Chair. It was just to make a quick correction in terms of what was in the officer's report. You mentioned that the Community Council had objected and then withdrawn their objection. So that's what the officer's report said. But when I went looking for the original, it turns out that wasn't actually the case. There was no representation from the Community Council at all. So it was just to make that clear. That's
very good. Thanks, Mr. Evans. So that's actually even, I think, sustains my position more, because the fact that they hadn't objected and they had an active community council. I know they had a period of when they hadn't one formed, but I think that you know, they are active, so there would have been any representation would have been made by them if it was required. So, as I say, I maintain what I've said previously with that slight amendment. Councillor Bell, sorry, over to you.
Galina, thank you. I was just going to concur with what you had said, but I would just have slight concerns about the, you know, about how durable that screen would be, and also you know, the hedge as well. So it's just a privacy thing, really. And if we had guarantees that, oh, you know, the screen was absolutely fine, it'll last for donkey's years, and that the hedge won't get chopped down, then I would have absolutely no objections at all.
Okay, I think we'd have a slight problem in terms of the hedge, given it's on the other side, because it's out with the control of the applicant. But
Yes,
certainly the screen part we could.
Yeah, but I mean, but the hedge is the, you know, if the hedge is actually in the ownership of number 14, then they can do what they want to with it, can't
Yeah,
they? It makes
exactly.
not a heap of difference. Thank you.
Yeah. Councillor Henriksson.
Thank you, Gavina. I'm going to have to disagree with both of you. I think I'm going to uphold the officer's recommendations. Looking at the height of the decking, and the fact that it's so much higher than the garden next door, I do think that could lead to an invasion of privacy. I don't think that the screen actually provides all that much, because it's not particularly wide compared to the width of the decking, which would allow people to overlook the garden from the far end of the decking. I just think it's an invasion of privacy. The other side, I know that's not the case, because there's the hedge there. I think possibly if there'd been a hedge along the boundary of the driveway, I wouldn't have been so concerned. But looking at the image that I'm looking at, it's completely wide open, and I just find that I think it would be an invasion of privacy. So I'm going to recommend we uphold the officer's decision.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Henriksson. I think, given that we've got a division, can I just check, Mr. Evans, the proposal for the application was for a screen to go the full depth of the decking, it wasn't it? I think that's what it looked like.
That's right, convener. Yeah,
Yeah.
full depth of the deck, but just not along the sort of front edge, if you like.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. As I say, so I think we've reached a position of where we do have a vote. So, Ms. McBain, can you just take us through that just for completeness for the record? Thank you.
Thank you, convener. So, yeah, yourself and Councillor Bell would like to uphold the. Sorry, get my words muddled up here.
Actually, it's probably helpful if I relate it back just to the planning policies. So, you know, we heard from officers that D1 quality placemaking wasn't an issue, and it wasn't refused on those grounds. It was a case of potential overlooking and amenity. Both Councillor Bell and I have concluded that we feel there's sufficient green cover for one side. The other side, again, with the added screen, which again, we'll get Mr. Evans perhaps provide some words for a condition for that to make sure that it's adequate. We feel that given there's been no complaints or objections from either side, and that there is a driveway between those two properties where the screen will be, that there's sufficient measures in place that will reduce the opportunity of any invasion of privacy. You could just be looking out a window and seeing the garden. So I think sitting on that terrace with that screen, having a cup of coffee won't actually impact on the residents. So that's just to say, tie it back to H1.
Thank you. Yeah, so just for the recording, so just to note that yourself and Councillor Bell would like to approve the application conditionally, and Councillor Henriksson wish to uphold the officer's recommendation to refuse.
Agreed.
Okay, so we'll get the conditions drawn up, and then they can be circulated to yourselves just for approval.
Okay, thank you. That's
okay.
great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, that concludes the first LRB. Moving on to the second review. Let me just get to it, sorry. And again, it's with Mr. Evans. The second review is in respect of a decision to refuse the application for the change of use from the 2 residential units, including the formation of the first floor extension above an existing single-storey extension, alterations to windows, doors, formation of porches, fence with gates and associated works at 215 Stonywood Road, Aberdeen, application 210763. We'll now hear from the planning advisor, Mr. Gavin Evans, who will provide us with a brief description of the application's proposal. I would point out that Mr. Evans attends today's meeting to provide us with the necessary professional planning guidance because he's not been involved in the earlier consideration of the application under review. Mr. Evans, however, will not be asked to express any views on the merits of the proposed development, and in effect, his role will be a neutral one involving the provision of factual information and guidance only. So with that, I'll pass over to Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Chair. As usual, just get the presentation up.
Thank you.
Here we are. Yes, thank you. Again, this case is a request for review against an application refused under delegated powers. Sorry, there's a slight typo in the description there, which I think has been compounded by autocorrect. So it should read change of use to form, not from 2 residential units, including formation of first floor extension above an existing single-storey extension, alterations to windows and doors, formation of porches, fence, and with gates and associated works. So effectively, it's a single dwelling house at the moment, and it's being subdivided to form 2 dwelling houses with various other physical alterations as well. The review was found to have been submitted with all the necessary information and within the requisite three-month time period from the refusal. The applicant's submission does state in the notice of review that no new matters have been raised. However, 2 new roads drawings appear to have been included that weren't part of the original application. These indicate the existing and proposed roads layouts in the context of the surrounding junctions, traffic signals and things like that. However, they weren't before the appointed officer at the time of the decision making. On that basis, it might be appropriate to ask our legal advisor just to give us a quick reminder of the circumstances under which new matters may be considered at the review stage.
Okay, we've got Lisa. Morning, Lisa.
Morning, Chair, councillors, LRB. Just to say, as was said, at the start in the procedure note, it's only in exceptional circumstances, or if the applicant couldn't have got that information in at another stage, for example, say if there was illness or something such like that. So in my view, I wouldn't think that would be allowed in at this stage. Okay, those 2 new road drawings.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay?
Perfect answers.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I feel that this information was available prior to the submission of the application. So I would again recommend members that we don't include that in today's consideration. Can we agree? Yeah, okay, that's fine. Back to yourself, Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, constantly getting this screen up and down.
It's okay.
There we go. Okay, so starting off with just a quick description of the site then. The application site comprises a 1.5-storey detached dwelling house and its associated garden grounds. It's located on the west side of Stonywood Road, just south of its junction with Market Street. The building fronts onto Stonywood Road and it utilises an existing driveway access to the north of the property, so just coming in here, quite narrow access there. So that driveway access is located beyond the stop line for a set of traffic signals on Stonywood Road, which means that the driveway is sort of, in between the traffic lights, as it were. So when exiting, the occupants won't necessarily know which lights are at red and at green. Although I imagine over time they've gotten used to the phasing, so you can probably tell. And yes, sorry, just making the point that those traffic lights on Stonywood Road form part of a wider sort of 4-way signalised junction which takes in Market Street and the other roads here. There you go. So that's just an image taken from the council's mapping software. It shows the same thing really. And then the aerial view is quite useful in terms of just showing you the location of the traffic lights in the road junction. There you can just see the shadow of the signals being cast onto the road there. So that's an indication of where they are. And this is where our existing driveway is. At the time of the officer's report, it was also understood that a garage had been partially constructed to the rear of the property. The site's bounded by residential dwellings to the south, north and west. Just working through these photographs. So this is the application property here, if you can see my cursor okay there. So you see the lean-to porch at the front. It's been fairly heavily altered over the passage of time, with flat-roofed box dormers added to the front, and then there's a significant extension to the rear there as well. You can see that there's a single-story offshoot out to the side there, and then this is the existing driveway that we're talking about. Slightly closer in view. That image dated December 2021, so fairly recent in the context of Google Images. And this is the approach. So this is the sort of cycle stop box, stop line here, and approximately here is where the new access junction is to be formed to serve the two new properties. So planning permission is being sought for the subdivision of this property into two semi-detached dwelling houses, along with the associated physical alterations to the building and the wider site. This shows that best. So as you can see at the moment, we've got that sort of narrow driveway access down the northern side of the property. That's now to be replaced by a much wider driveway on the opposite side. The existing building, which has been, as I mentioned, heavily altered from its original form, including large box dormers to front and rear and a flat-roofed single-story extension to the side, would be substantially altered to present as a more regular two-story gable-roofed form. Sorry, that's just a closer view in of the site plan. So you can see that the garage to the rear, and there's parking for vehicles at the rear of the plot, and then each has its own distinct view. So yes, would present a more regular two-story gable-roofed form with new lean-to style porches added to the front elevation of each house. This would involve the resultant building measuring 12 meters in width and 9.5 meters in length. There's no material increase in the footprint of the building as such. There's just sort of minor alterations to form the porches. What you will see is, in terms of the floor plan, at ground floor level, this section over here is a flat-roofed single-story extension, whereas the proposal is now to take the roof out across that and have additional upper floor accommodation as well. So this first floor plan shows that best. So we're looking at a flat roof below here, whereas now this is going to give you the additional first floor space. And then the new porch is formed, so you've got a porch for each property, replacing the existing sort of lean-to porch there. Elevations then, so as existing and as proposed, facing onto Stonywood Road, existing at the top, as proposed at the bottom. You can see from the existing elevation there that it is a little bit of a, let's say hodgepodge, but there have been various alterations to the property over the period of time, to the point where you're not entirely sure how to read the building. As proposed, it's a much more rationalized appearance, fairly traditional sort of semi-detached forms. The building would be finished in white render, with the porches formed in grey composite cladding. Roof is in grey concrete roofing tiles, and windows and doors also in grey in UPVC. The building would be symmetrical in its form, as you can see there, but also the internal layouts would be sort of mirror images of one another, if you can see from the layouts there, and at ground floor level as well. So they're just handed effectively. Each dwelling would have its own front and private rear curtilage, you can see from this site plan. Rear gardens would be soft landscaped and enclosed by 1.8 metre high timber fences, and would also include areas for bin stores within the curtilage. Shared parking area incorporating the garage would be formed to the rear. Of sort of central importance to the determination is the formation of this new access on the opposite side of the property. The existing access would be removed, and then this land would be sort of given over to form part of the garden ground for plot B there. Plans show that the garage to the rear of the site would be shared between the properties and incidental to the sort of domestic occupation. The officer's report makes the point that it's not entirely clear from the submission, as the garage is shown sort of out with the residential plots, and it may be, if members are minded to support the application otherwise, necessary to sort of include an informative note or something just to make clear that this needs to remain for the residential occupancy of here rather than being hived off and in separate use effectively. So just working through the other elevations here, this rear elevation, you can see that there's been significant alteration to the property, sort of flat roofed extension out to the back, now a much more regular form. And again, as I mentioned, you know, we're taking the roof line out over that existing flat roofed extension to gain additional accommodation at first floor level. Side elevations as existing and as proposed. And then in terms of relevant planning history.
Sorry, can I just stop you, Mr. Evans? There's a lady that's appeared on our screen. Could you switch your camera off, please? I'm not sure who that is. Lindsay, can you do anything there?
I think I can just mute people.
Yeah,
Mari, can you please switch off your camera?
there he is.
Oh. I think she's just joined, so maybe just give it a minute.
I don't know. I'm just trying to. Yeah. I don't know how to. How to switch off the camera. I didn't. Screen.
Okay, do you want to carry on tonight?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of planning history for the site, in 2017, planning permission was granted for change of use from a dwelling to form a guest house. Excuse me, and the erection of a two-storey extension to the rear. That would involve 8 car parking spaces, which would use the existing site access rather than forming any new driveway. That consent hasn't been implemented, but it does remain live effectively, so it's possible that somebody could choose to implement that planning permission. 2018, permission was sought for the erection of 4 residential flats set across 2 stories, and 1 attached single-storey retail unit, including shared car park to the rear. Yeah, the application there was withdrawn prior to determination, so there's no consent attached to that. The applicant's submission notes that 11 car parking spaces were proposed as part of that application, making use of the existing access rather than forming any new one. The local Dyson Stonywood Community Council had raised concerns about the existing access's proximity to the junction. So I think the applicant's making the case there that there had been concerns about intensifying the use of the existing access, which has perhaps led to them seeking to provide a new one as part of their proposal. So then also in 2018, permission was granted for the installation of a new front porch, blocking up of windows and door, formation of new window and door openings, and canopy to the rear. Again, that consent remains live, but hasn't been implemented as yet. Turning then to the appointed officer's reasons for refusal. Decision notice again is included in the agenda pack in full, but the main points as follows. As no noise impact assessment had been provided, but had been requested, the appointed officers contends that they had not been able to properly assess the proposal against various policies, those relating to residential amenity, design, Aberdeen Airport, and noise, and having regard for the level of amenity afforded to prospective residents and the effects of intensifying residential use close to the airport and its effect on existing airport operations. So really just making the point that the appointed officer didn't feel able to make an informed decision on this application because they didn't have the information before them to do so. Also noting that the absence of this essential information prevents due consideration against the proposed plan and its equivalent policies. States that the proposal would adversely affect road safety due to the formation of a new access close to a busy signalised junction, with cars exiting the access onto the carriageway over a bicycle stop line. It was highlighted that any vehicles waiting to turn into the access from the southbound carriageway would hinder the free flow of traffic through a busy junction. So if I can just scroll back a little bit to a site plan just to sort of discuss that slightly. I think the point that's being made is that in order to get into the access here, if vehicles are heading south, either from here or from here, they would be obliged to wait for a break in traffic. And because the access is right over the cycle stop line, if this light's red and you've got cyclists queued here, they're effectively going to be blocking the flow of traffic southbound from both of these junctions and potentially Market Street as well.
If it's there.
Sorry, just go back to that slide for the reasons again. It was also highlighted that the proposal would therefore conflict with policy T2 relating to managing the transport impact of developments. Turning then to the applicant's case, a statement was included within the submission, and that's again available in the agenda pack. Refers directly to the reasons for refusal. The main points include the following. Firstly, notes that a shop previously stood to the south of the cottage at 215 Stonywood Road. However, that has been demolished. Notes that the existing site access is of long standing and existed prior to the installation of the traffic signals, the crossing or the bike lanes. Contends that a noise impact assessment was never sought by the planning authority when assessing earlier applications for change of use. So that's from dwelling to guest house or for house and multiple occupation. But nevertheless, the applicant's view is that concerns around noise can be addressed by carrying out a noise impact assessment and via the design and materials employed. Highlights that a number of new domestic, commercial and educational developments have been constructed in the same area of the city, which is subject to airport noise, and explains that the existing access, which predates the installation of traffic signals, is difficult to use as a vehicle exiting is not actually aware which phase the lights are at, and is also very tight to manoeuvre. Considers that the proposed access would represent an improvement on the current arrangement, and notes that other live permissions would increase the number of vehicles using the existing access. Sorry, I should have flicked onto a second slide there. Highlights that efforts were made to discuss the access with officers and find a solution, but no agreement could be reached on that front, and asks that members visit the site themselves to see firsthand the benefit of the proposed new access. In terms of consultations, the Council's Roads Development Management team objected to the application, stating that the new access location is unacceptable as it's in the middle of a signalised junction and pedestrian crossing point. The installation of the existing access was before the signals were installed, so that is recognised. Roads team also state that there's a requirement for 2 parking spaces per dwelling. All parking bays should be at least 5 metres long by 2.5 metres wide and require a clear 6 metre aisle width, as well as a 0.5 metre turning head for end spaces. The roads team had requested that full dimensions were submitted to demonstrate that that was all achievable. Looking at the site plan, sorry to flick around quite so much. It does seem like there's fairly ample space shown there for accommodating 4 vehicles. So in principle, I don't think that seems insurmountable. It might be the sort of thing that if members were otherwise minded to support the application, you could seek to deal with by condition. In terms of, I'll just leave that slide up there. In terms of consultation with the Council's environmental health team, they had also objected to the proposal, stating that the application site would be exposed to noise from aircraft from Aberdeen International Airport, as the site overlaps the relevant 57 LAEQ noise contour, which is used for assessing, or basically there's a sort of a presumption against development within that noise contour. And it would also be subject to road traffic noise from the A947. Due to its location, environmental health colleagues concluded that it would be very difficult to achieve a reasonable level of outdoor amenity throughout the day, and for the development to comply with the relevant requirements of the World Health Organization's guideline values for indoor living areas in terms of noise as well. Notwithstanding those concerns, a detailed noise impact assessment would be required to be undertaken by a suitably qualified noise consultant to further explore and establish the impacts of those noise sources. However, no such noise assessment was provided by the applicants in support of the proposal. Excuse me. The Council's waste strategy team had no objection to the proposal, noting that the applicant should contact them separately prior to first occupation to ensure that bins are provided. As I mentioned, there are bin storage areas identified within each plot, so there is provision made there. Scottish Water had no objection to the proposal, stating that the applicant will need to apply directly to them for a connection, and they can't confirm capacity before then, but that's just a sort of standard commentary that they give. They were able to confirm capacity for foul-only connection to Persley wastewater treatment works. In terms of the local Bucksburn and New Hills Community Council, there was no response received from the Community Council, and there were also no representations from neighbours or other members of the public. So at that point, Chair, I'll just hand back to you for members to decide whether you feel a site visit or any other procedure is warranted in this case. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Evans. We now need to consider whether we have sufficient information in front of us today to take the decision on the application. Members will note the applicant has stated in the review document, it says that no further procedure is required on my sheet, but I think, Mr. Evans, did you suggest that? Oh,
Yeah, I just had a quick check, the notice of review that was submitted, and they didn't state that they wanted further procedure, but maybe Mr. Evans has read something else.
Well, my apologies. I must just have been taking that from an older version of my my introduction. So if you've checked that out, Lindsay, that's great. Sorry about that.
Absolutely fine. We can go through the same procedure and you can decide.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. So I'll start off with Councillor Hendrickson this time. Do you feel you've sufficient information to determine it today?
Yes, I do. Yes.
Councillor Bell?
Yes, thank you. Plenty of information.
Okay, and I likewise. So now that we've decided that we do have sufficient information to take the decision today and that no further procedures are required, I'll hand back to Mr. Evans, who will take us through the relevant policies and other considerations. Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just find my way to the right slide here. Here we are. Thank you. So as I mentioned, the site is in an area of predominantly residential character, and it's zoned as such in the local development plan, so policy H1 applies. And the same criteria as we went through for the previous case are also applicable. So firstly, would the proposal represent overdevelopment of a given site? The officer's report concluded that in their view it would not represent overdevelopment of the plot. Noting in terms of plot coverage, the council's subdivision of residential curtilages aims for no more than 33% of a plot to be developed. This is 35%, So it's in the right sort of ballpark, and I think they were satisfied that there wasn't any significant harm arising from that, and it was otherwise sort of consistent with context. Secondly, would a proposal have an unacceptable impact on the character and amenity of the area? Again, that's one for members to consider, what you feel the character is here, and to what extent it's sensitive to change. The officer in their report came to the conclusion that the proposal would not adversely affect existing residential character and amenity. Their concerns centred more around the standard of amenity for residents within the new dwellings themselves, rather than the effect on neighbours. Thirdly, would a proposal result in the loss of a valuable and valued area of open space? Again, this concerns a residential curtilage, so there's no public open space affected by the proposal. And lastly, would it comply with relevant supplementary guidance? Relevant here is the document I mentioned, the subdivision of residential curtilages guidance. The officer's report identified no major conflicts there. A slight sort of increase on the threshold stated for plot coverage, but you know, that's a fairly marginal conflict. Policy B4, particularly central to the assessment in terms of noise levels. So the airport safeguarding map identifies areas for consultation with Aberdeen Airport's safeguarding team. Consultation wasn't required on the basis of public safety in this instance. It's more of a noise issue. Proposed developments must not compromise safe operation of the airport. Matters such as the height of buildings, external lighting, landscaping, bird hazard management, etc. would be taken into account in assessing any potential impacts. None of that's particularly relevant here because we're talking about existing buildings, existing residential use, albeit the intensification of that use by subdivision. The last point is perhaps most relevant. Applications for residential development in the areas where aircraft noise levels are in excess of 57 decibels LAEQ, which is the summer 16-hour measurement for that, is identified on the airport noise contour map, will be refused due to the inability to create an appropriate level of residential amenity and the need to safeguard the future operation of Aberdeen International Airport. So this site is within that 57 decibel contour, so policy B4 is effectively indicating a presumption against residential development in this location on the basis of conflict between aircraft noise and residential amenity. Of course, we have an existing property here. It's more just the intensification that we're looking at. So turning then to policy D1 relating to design. Oh, sorry, there's one more criteria that I missed off the policy B4 there. For proposed development that will be located out with the 57 decibel contour, but within the remaining noise contour areas, applicants may be required to submit a noise assessment demonstrating that an appropriate level of residential amenity can be achieved. As we've heard, this is within the 57 decibel contour where there's a presumption against residential use full stop. But it's also notable that no noise impact assessment was provided to sort of counter that policy presumption against either. So there's not much to go on in terms of hanging a decision. Policy D1 in relation to design quality. This sets out the following expectations and these 6 essential qualities of good placemaking. Most relevant ones are perhaps safe and pleasant, due to the concerns raised over amenity standards for prospective occupants from airport noise, along with the roads development management team's concerns about safety issues coming from the proposed new access. Excuse me. Otherwise, in design terms, the officer's report refers to the various historic alterations and extensions to the property as compromising its interest, and notes that the proposal would effectively rationalise its design, scale and massing, introduce some symmetry, and in terms of wider context, it's also recognised there's a range of architectural forms The officer's report also noted that in their view, the proposed materials would be acceptable in that context. Turning next to policy NE6 relating to flooding, drainage and water quality. This sets out that development will not be permitted if it would increase the risk of flooding elsewhere or itself be at risk of flooding. The officer's report highlights that the site's not identified in SEPA's flood risk maps as having an identified flood risk itself, as the proposal would result in a minor enlargement to the building and would incorporate new areas of soft landscaping to offer drainage possibilities. The officer concluded that it would have negligible impact on the functional floodplain and wouldn't increase the risk of flooding in the area. So policy R6 also relevant in terms of waste provision. This sets out that new development should be accompanied by sufficient space for the storage of general waste, recyclables, etc. The officer's report notes that the site layout plans show areas for bin storage within each plot, so expresses satisfaction on that front. In terms of access and the transport impacts of development, policy T2 applies, stating that development must demonstrate the measures have been taken to minimise traffic generated and maximise opportunities for sustainable and active travel. Whilst there wouldn't be a particular increase in traffic generated, the issues here are more to do with access and the flow of traffic based on the relationship with the surrounding road network. The officer's report, excuse me, sorry, notes that the new access would enter onto a busy signalised junction and cross directly over the stop line for bicycles on the northbound carriageway. Notes also that southbound vehicles seeking to use that new access would have insufficient space due to the proximity of the pedestrian crossing. Furthermore, when the northbound lights are red, cyclists queuing in the northbound carriageway are likely to block access to the driveway from the southbound carriageway. And if occupants were to wait for that part of the junction to clear, they would in turn block the flow of traffic through the junction behind them, resulting in congestion on the local network. The officer's report notes that...
Do you need to get a glass of water, Gavin? Are you okay?
Sorry, excuse me. Yeah, we'll
No,
just
no,
take a
it's
quick
just
drink if that's all right.
Yeah, please do, because there's nothing worse when you're trying to speak and cough at the same time.
Thank you. Sorry about that, everyone.
Okay,
Got a
no
bit of a
problem.
frog in my throat today. So yeah, the officer's report also noted that even if the signals were to be relocated, the access would require changes to signal sequencing that could have negative consequences on the flow of vehicular traffic. The presence of the existing access is noted. However, the roads team's view is that it's a long-standing arrangement which would not justify proposals for a new access. Then, in turn, policy T3 relating to sustainable and active travel. This states that developments must be accessible by a range of transport modes with an emphasis on active and sustainable travel. The officer's report notes that there are bus facilities, core paths and cycle routes in the local area, so it's comfortable that the site's accessible. Policy T5, here we go, relates to noise, and this states that a noise impact assessment will be required as part of a planning application. That is to say, not via condition, as it's necessary to establish principles where significant exposure to noise is likely. In this case, the zoning of the site within that noise contour for the airport is an indicator that there is an expectation of considerable noise nuisance. And on that basis, a noise impact assessment was requested but hasn't been provided. Policy T5 also states a presumption against noisy developments being located close to noise-sensitive uses. This is more the contrary to that. The airport's the noise generator, such that there's a specific policy requirement under B4 in order to try and control the conflict between its operations and noise-sensitive uses. The general aim in restricting new residential uses or intensified residential uses is that bit by bit and cumulatively there's a risk that you can undermine the continued operation of the airport over time, and therefore it makes sense to support non-residential uses in close proximity to the airport. Policy CI1 on digital infrastructure states that all new residential and commercial development will be expected to have access to modern, up-to-date, high-speed communications infrastructure. The appointed officer's report notes that this is an existing dwelling within the sort of built-up urban area, so it should have access to that at present, and certainly would have the capability to connect to existing networks. So just points for consideration. First and foremost, the members feel that the proposal satisfies the policy tests within policy H1 for residential areas. Specifically, is the principle of residential use supported, and would it result in an unacceptable impact on the character or amenity of the area? As we heard before, it's less about the effect on neighbours and more about the amenity for residents of these units that's the central focus. In design terms, is a proposal of a high quality of design appropriate to its context as required by policy D1, having regard for factors such as scale, siting, proportions, materials, that sort of thing. Noise, noting the potential for residential development in this location to be adversely affected by airport noise and conversely to threaten continued operation of the airport in the longer term, the absence of a noise impact assessment required by policy B4 and the policy position set out in relation to the development in this area and the feedback provided by the Council's environmental health colleagues on noise matters, do members consider that the proposal would satisfy the requirements of policies B4 on Aberdeen Airport and T5 on noise? Next, do members feel that the site itself is sufficiently accessible by sustainable means, and would the proposal appropriately manage the transport impacts of it, of the development as required by policy T2, bearing in mind the response from the Roads Development Management team? So if not wholly in accordance with the development plan, do members feel that there are other material considerations that weigh in favour of approval? Happy to take any questions or to advise on conditions should members be minded to overturn. Happy to pass back to you there, Chair. Thank you very much, and apologies for the coughing.
That's no problem, Mr. Evans. Okay, thank you very much. Members, questions for Mr. Evans? Councillor Henrickson, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm not sure this question is going to be appropriate. It's I'm looking on Google Earth at the moment, and I notice that immediately across the road, there's new developments. Would they have had noise impact assessments? And if so, could we assume that the similar sort of impact assessment would be done on this property, bearing in mind that it's already there? That may be that. I think that might be out of order. You know, that might not be appropriate, but it's just something that struck me.
Okay, Mr. Evans.
Yeah, I could only really speculate, to be honest, Councillor Henrickson. I would assume that if the area across the road that you're referring to is also within the same noise contour area, it's likely that a noise impact assessment would have been provided and mitigation measures proposed. I don't have access to that at this point, but I'm not sure exactly where that 57 decibel noise contour lies, you know, in terms of one side of the road or another.
Yeah, and I think it's down to the individual application having their own environmental noise assessment done, so that it can, you know, support or otherwise that particular application. Is there any other questions for you, Councillor Henrickson? No. Councillor Bell. still on mute. Oop, he's gone. If we could just pause for 2 moments, folks, until I think Councillor Bell's obviously lost connectivity with us.
Just take the opportunity to go and get a throat sweetie.
Good, no problem, Gavin.
I'll just go and get a glass of water as well. Oh, he's back.
Yeah, that's okay.
Apologies about no apologies. I was so my I was getting so many invites suddenly appearing on my machine that I just tried to get rid of them, and this blinky picture disappeared. So I then had to come out of Teams, come back into Teams again. Apologies. Very
okay.
quick question.
It's okay. Gavin's just popped to get a cough sweet, so
Right.
give me
Okay.
2 seconds.
We
Right.
we don't.
I think they were all quite glad that you had popped off for 2 minutes to let Del get water. But we're all back now, so we'll
sorry,
continue.
I couldn't get you back. I'm sorry, convener. I tried, but I'm afraid it didn't work.
Don't worry, the
so,
floor is yours.
Yeah. So one very quick question: is the existing property occupied? The one that's going to, so this property is going to be, the plan is to have it extended, so forth. Is it currently occupied?
That's a very good question, Councillor Bell, and I don't actually know the answer to that.
Okay, but properties in the area are all occupied, aren't they? So
yes,
people are living near around there.
Oh yes, yes. So you just
okay.
mean in terms of the airport noise, yeah.
Okay, yeah, super. Thanks. That was all I really wanted to ask. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I haven't got any questions because I think you did such a good explanation. Can't even get the words out now. So members, in accordance with the procedure note circulated at the local review body, will now discuss and decide the manner in which the review is to proceed. I would highlight that all representations relating to the case have been considered and taken into account. Let's start with Councillor Bell this time.
Okay, thank you, convener. So I have quite serious concerns about safety and the junction. So I noticed that there hasn't been any building, any construction plan submitted. So so that junction presumably would be very, very busy with building vehicles for some while, whilst the extension was being built, modifications were being made. No noise assessment, but I'm not sure of the relevance of that, to be honest, because we've just established that there are other properties in the area. They're all subject to that noise, and I don't think that. Plus, this property exists. People might be living there. They might not be living there, but I'm not entirely sure that the noise assessment is relevant. So construction at that junction, I think, would be very difficult. I also noticed that Scottish Water have said that they won't accept any additional connection into the surface sewage system, which again I feel is very significant. There's been no drainage impacts assessment carried out. There's apparently none required. Presumably that's because the ground is already it's already covered with tar macadam, so any water runoff might well have already been taken account of. But with additional property there'll be additional drainage requirements, and there are we kind of any more tie-ins, so we are told. So I'm happy with the information I have. Should I do I need to wait for Councillor Henrickson?
No, if you would like to state your position, feel free.
Okay, so my position is I would like to uphold officers' recommendation. I feel that junction is far too busy, far too dangerous. and I really don't think that this has been at all well thought out.
Okay, thank you,
Thank you.
Councillor. Councillor Hendrickson.
Thank you, convener. Yes, like Councillor Bell, I'm less concerned about the noise, because I find that if they do a noise impact assessment, excuse me, that should address most of the problems, especially regarding that there's an awful lot of properties already within the area. However, like Councillor Bell, I do share concern regarding the junction. It's a very, I know from experience, is a very busy junction, and I don't see how the situation can be improved. At the moment, there's a workaround, but I'm not completely happy about that with the access in the middle of the junction. So I think on grounds of the roads department's objection, I would support the officer's objection.
Okay, thanks very much, gentlemen. Again, having looked at it, and whilst there are obviously properties in the existing area that have, will have the same planes going over them, etc., I think there is a requirement for a noise impact assessment to be done in terms of being able to mitigate in terms of the materials used, etc., etc. So I think that we should still, we require one, particularly when we've got quite a strong message in B4 in terms of if it's within a certain distance, that it should automatically be refused. Now, so I do think there should be a noise impact assessment done regardless of whether we feel that ultimately that will be the deciding factor. But I think to make sure that any sort of materials and stuff that need to be used in any construction were actually identified, and this would assist with that. Like you, gentlemen, I have huge concerns around the junction. Now, I know that they have currently got planning approvals, which would see an intensification potentially on that junction. However, it's at the other access point. And I think where roads object, I always listen very carefully, because it's the safety of people not just coming in and out of that driveway, but crossing the pavement and using the signalised crossing, cyclists, anything that could raise the safety issues for those residents and pedestrians and other car users have to be considered very carefully. So I would be in the same vein as yourselves. I think that our officers have reviewed the policies, and I think T2 in particular, environmental health, as I say, have raised concerns that there's been no noise impact assessments. We've heard about Scottish Water. So I think regardless of the fact that there's no representations from the Community Council or neighbouring properties, I think due diligence perhaps on this application hasn't been done in terms of the necessary reports put in. And I think for that reason, and along with the fact that our roads team have objected, and if you look at D1, part of the consideration is about making sure somewhere has a safe and pleasant amenity. I think that there is obviously a conflict with that part of D1. I don't think any of us will deny that the application looks a lot better than that's currently on site. However, there's got to be more than aesthetics that play a part of this. And I think Mr. Evans made reference to the garage at the rear. Now, I think in one of the pictures, it looked like there was a digger in there. I'm not quite sure what it was doing there, but, I think that we have to make sure that that doesn't suddenly become a separate business. So there's an awful lot, I think, still to be thrashed out with this application that I'm uncomfortable with. So I'm happy to support the officer's recommendation. So I think that's a unanimous decision. Ms. McMahon, do you need anything else from us?
No, that's fine. So just to confirm that you're all wishing to uphold the officer's recommendation, so that's to refuse the application, and you just want to go with the reasons that were in the original decision letter.
Yeah, given that we haven't got a noise assessment to be able to say otherwise.
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, folks. Right, we'll now turn to consideration of the third review in respect of the decision to refuse the application for the change of use from the amenity space. Oh, sorry, thank you, Mr. Evans. You can escape this. Mrs. Green's now taking over from you.
Thank you. I'll take my coughing fit elsewhere. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for your attendance today, Gavin. Sorry, back to the change of use from amenity space to footway crossing and the formation of driveways with associated works at 15 to 21 Brebner Crescent, Aberdeen. That's planning reference 211459. We'll now hear from the planning advisor, Ms. Lucy Green, who will provide us with a brief description on the application proposal. I would point out that Mrs. Green attends today's meeting to provide us with the necessary professional planning guidance because she's not been involved in the earlier consideration of the application under review. Ms. Green will, however, not be asked to express any views on the merits of the proposed development, and in effect her role will be a neutral one involving the provision of factual information and guidance only. Over to yourself, Ms. Green.
Thank you, convener. I'll just get my presentation on the screen.
Thank you.
So this relates to a request for a review against an application refused under delegated powers for the change of use from amenity space to footway crossing and formation of driveways with associated works at 15 to 21 Brebner Crescent. So the review was submitted with all the necessary information and within the time limit of 3 months following the decision of the appointed officer. And the applicant has indicated on the notice of review that there are no new matters raised in the submissions. And in terms of procedure, the applicants expressed the view that the review may proceed on the basis of the information provided. So I'll provide some further background information before I hand back to you for discussion of the case.
Thank you.
So there's the location plan. The site includes the 4 houses that you can see, 2 semi-detached and then 2 other houses, which are half of pairs of semi-detached houses. And it also includes 50 square metres of amenity space and the section of footway between the residential boundaries and the amenity space. And it's located at the south end of a cul-de-sac of Brebner Crescent within a residential area, and the road terminates to the north of the amenity space. So that's the overhead image from Google Maps of the area, and that's this year that was taken. So you can see that the amenity space in question comprises half of a larger area of amenity space at the end of the cul-de-sac, and it's covered in short grass. Brebner Crescent and the wider area have a number of similar areas of open space in and around the streetscape. So the front curtilage of numbers 15, 17 and 19 already have hard surfaced areas. And they've been, well, as you can see there, informally used as driveways by vehicles crossing the amenity space and the footway. So I'll just run through a couple of the other slides. That's quite an old image from Street View 2008. That's the 3D image. So the area in question is this half here. The dividing line is in line with the split between those 2 houses there. And these are photographs that were provided with the review submission. So moving on to the proposal. Firstly, just to mention that there is no planning history to the site. So planning permission is sought for the change of use of the amenity land, which is 50 square metres. And it's at the northwest corner of the site to allow access to the single driveways single driveways within each of the residential properties. And the amenity space would be replaced with grasscrete units planted with grass on hardcore, although it's noted that the applicants have expressed willingness to use another surface. So vehicles would cross the driveways by way of a drop curb and the new formed footway crossing into the driveways on their individual properties. And the case officer had stated that the hard surfaces shown on the submitted plan correspond with the dimensions and design of the hard surfaces that exist on site. So that would need to be changed. Sorry, I had a connection problem. My notes disappeared. Right, back to the notes. Yes, so those driveways that exist would need to be altered to comply with the application proposal. So it's also noted in the report that due to the shape of the residential boundaries, some of them are narrow at the next to the footway, they would partially adjoin each other, the hard surfaces, to form a continuous parking area, which would mean that vehicles may need to cross the driveways of other properties in order to exit and enter. So the driveways would be finished in paving slabs within the closest 2 meters to the footway, which would slope away from the footway. And it's also noted that the hard surfaces within the front curtilage of the dwellings would not require planning permission in themselves, as they are permitted development. So there's limited consideration of those within the application. So turning to the reasons for refusal, there was a loss of open space, which contributes to the character of the area and is used informally for recreation. Secondly, it was refused in terms of visual amenity in relation to the hard surfacing for the footway crossings and the layout of the street. Third reason was in terms of road safety. So this was vehicles crossing driveways of other properties and also parking outside the driveway, so that they would impede access and result potentially in overhanging the footway. Also, the vehicles parking at number 15 would be unlikely to park at 90 degrees to the footway just because of the layout of the area. Further reason was the loss of 3 public parking spaces on street. Also, the precedent that would be set. And for all those reasons, that the proposal would be contrary to policies on design, green space, residential areas, transport, and the proposed plan, similar policies within that. So looking at the applicant's case, these are set out in the notice of review and the statement, both of which are in the agenda. And the central points that they make are that in terms of loss of open space, the applicant would be happy to remove the entire area of green space and the area has already become devalued because of cars driving across the green space, and the proposal would restore amenity by tidying that up. In terms of the detriment to visual amenity, that changes inevitably result in different layouts, and that the houses were built when there were fewer cars, so that the turning area is used for parking, that there are already various driveways in place. Number 13 could also install a driveway without planning permission, and public spaces would be lost. They're saying that alternatives to Grass Creek could be used, and in terms of road safety, suitable driveway lengths could be achieved, which is shown on the plans. And although the driveway some users of driveways would have to cross other driveways in order to access their property, that could be done safely. And again, parking at right angles to the footway, that the driveways are actually proposed at right angles, so that would resolve that issue. In terms of loss of on-street parking, it's noted that number 31 already has a driveway, which effectively removes 3 spaces, and that number 13 could also install a driveway, which could remove another 3 spaces. So it's contended that the proposal would result in a gain of 4 spaces. In terms of precedent, they note that the proposal must be considered on merit, that some residents within the cul-de-sac already have driveways, that vehicular and pedestrian safety would not be worse than currently, and that the driveways that have been established in similar situations in other cul-de-sacs, and that hasn't formed a precedent so far. They further comment that this would allow for the charging of electric vehicles in the future, and that the driveways could be surfaced to allow for drainage and reduce environmental impact. So I'll stop at that point and hand back to you, convener.
Thanks very much, Ms. Green. We now need to consider whether we have sufficient information in front of us today to take the decision on the application. Members will note that the applicant has stated in the review document that no further procedure is required before determination. Members, remember that if you do not feel you have enough information to take a decision, you can request that a site visit be undertaken, further written information provided, or a hearing arranged. Councillor Henriksson?
Yes, convener, I think I'm fine.
Okay, right. Councillor Bell?
Thank you, convener. Yeah, there's enough information. I have a question, but yeah, there's plenty of information in the pack. Thank you.
Yeah, equally, I'm content. I was just going to ask Ms. Green, could you perhaps take up a Google sort of sky view of the area, just so that we can have a quick look just before we move into questions, just to satisfy me that I can have an overall view of the area?
Yes, I'll do that. I've also realised that I didn't comment on the consultation responses, so I can do that as well.
Yeah, please, thank you.
So I'll go to the image first.
I do have, yeah, because mine's
sorry.
black and white, that's why, because I don't have it on the computer.
What was it that you wanted me to show?
Yeah, I just wanted to be able to have a look at the kind of the overall area, because I wanted to look at some of the other cul-de-sacs. So
yeah, I mean, this is the one that we're looking at, and then there's obviously this one.
It seems to have done a slightly different.
Yeah, that's. I had a look to see whether there are any applications on that, but there's nothing on our system, so that goes back to 2009.
Yeah. Can you move the picture down a bit just to see if there's any ones further?
Yeah, I didn't see any others when I looked earlier.
It's quite peculiar. No, it doesn't seem to be. Okay.
Those are different.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, it's just quite an unusual layout on those ones, I felt. Okay. Because all the rest tend to have the grass, as you can see up as at Lady or whatever, Lint Mill Place tends to be a bit more like that than at the very top of it. Okay, no, that's fine. Thank you. That's perfect. Do you want to just run through the consultee comments?
Yeah.
Thanks.
I don't actually have a slide on these, so I'll just run through them from my notes. So Roads Development Management Team objected to the proposal. They recognised why the residents would seek to achieve guaranteed parking spaces for themselves. However, they couldn't support the application. I mean, it's the similar reasons that are in the decision notice, really. The potential for indiscriminate parking as vehicles would park outside their residential boundaries, potentially blocking public footway and the proposed access, and this could cause conflict for access and egress from the neighbouring properties. Proposed driveways would not be perpendicular to the road as required by supplementary guidance, and the proposed footway crossing would become adopted grasscrete paving. That wouldn't be considered an acceptable material to have as a frequent run over by vehicles on an adopted area. I mean, as we noted before, the residents would be happy to consider an alternative to that, but so they also comment that the proposal could cause a precedent for further applications for others wishing to create similar parking areas. The estates team were consulted and had no objection. They stated they had no locus in this. And also Northfield Community Council, no response was received from them. So that's all the consultation responses.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, given that we've all said that we have sufficient information in terms of determining the application today, I'll just ask my screen to go through the relevant policies and other considerations. Thank you.
Yep, I'll just do that. Next up again. Okay, so the site lies within a residential area, so it's zoned under policy H1. As we know, there are various criteria within that policy. The first one is not particularly relevant here. It doesn't constitute overdevelopment, so we won't discuss that further. The second criteria is, do proposals have an unacceptable impact on the character and amenity of the area? So that's really a judgment for members to consider the character of the area and determine the extent to which the proposal would harm that amenity. The third criteria is about the loss of valuable and valued areas of open space, as defined in the open space audit. And this isn't defined within the audit, but it is part of a public open space and would be affected by the proposal. And there's also consideration of the overall impact in terms of the area that would remain. And lastly, whether the proposal complies with supplementary guidance. So the relevant ones in this case would be the transportation supplementary guidance and the householder supplementary guidance, which I'll come back to. So policy on design, it's really the relevant parts of that are in terms of good design and detailing being sought from proposals. Policy NE3 on urban green space. This seeks to retain areas which include all other areas of green space, except where alternatives would be made available. So in particular, it says that development is only acceptable provided that there's no significant loss to landscape character and amenity, similar consideration to the residential policy, that public access would be maintained or enhanced. And the other sort of relevant one would be replacement green space of the same or better quality as provided. So just move on to the householder development guide. So that comments on changes of use of amenity spaces, states that they shouldn't adversely affect spaces that make a worthwhile contribution to the character and amenity of the area. That proposals should not fragment or erode larger areas of open space, that they shouldn't worsen or create a deficit in recreational open space, and that they should not result in a loss of visual amenity, including loss of trees or landscaping. So lastly, the transport and accessibility supplementary guidance. The relevant parts of that are driveways being 5 metres in length and 3 metres wide. There's a comment on the gradient. These aren't particularly steep in this case. They should be internally drained, that there's no loose material within the first 2 metres. And the most relevant one, I suppose, is that driveways should meet the road at right angles to optimise visibility. So finally, points for consideration. Sites zoned within a residential area. So does the proposal comply with those tests within policy H1 in particular, loss of green space and amenity? There's the issue of road safety and a design issue. Is this good detailing and design? And overall, does the proposal comply with the development plan considered as a whole, or are there material considerations that outweigh the development plan policies? Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Green. Councillor Bell, have you got questions for Ms. Green?
Yes, I do, please. So can you turn to page 147 of the pack, please? So that actually shows 4 cars parked, and it shows this amenity area and the houses in the cul-de-sac.
Can you share it on the screen? Thanks, Lucy, if it's possible.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, so my questions are these. So shown on that picture is a green rectangle at and there's also a white, sort of a white, yeah. What are they?
I'm not sure. I did wonder that whether they were goals lying flat, but I wondered whether they were sections of terrace fencing. I'm not sure, to be honest. It doesn't let you zoom in enough to see.
Okay. So there will be the proposal states there will be loss of parking spaces. So which parking spaces are they that will be lost?
Well, when you look at different dates of the overhead aerial pictures, you see cars parked sort of length, nose into that, or
Right.
reverse parked in that area, but you can also see cars parked at angles into here. So
Okay.
It would be parking within this area. I'm not exactly sure how people park in there.
Okay. Could you turn to page 148 of the pack, please? Yeah. So it looks like there's already a pseudo dropped curb there with the yellow and black plastic things.
Yeah.
But also it looks like part of the amenity area has been removed anyway, and there's just there's grass and there's sand there.
Mm.
So it looks like they've already been doing their modifications, and maybe where the black and yellow plastic blocks are is the limit to which cars normally park, possibly, from what you were saying.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just an informal situation, but the site
Yeah.
extends further to the side
Yeah.
where the grass is, to include that house you can see in the corner.
Right, but then who would have actually put those put the the yellow and black blocks there, because they look like council supplied, don't they?
Yes, I would doubt that it's the council though.
Right.
It's probably the residents, I would suggest,
Yeah.
Councillor Bell.
Okay.
See if they're damaging their cars.
Right. Okay. Yeah, thanks. I don't have any other questions. Thank you.
Councillor Henriksen.
Yeah, I just can we go back to that the picture 147? I just want to get this exact. Sorry about this.
It's okay. There we go. There you go.
That's the one. So how much? I just wanted to get into my head. How much of the green space are we looking to actually lose? Is it roughly half of it? Is that how it would be divided? Sort of
Yeah,
straight
it's
down the
that.
middle of the boundary of the two houses that are up at the top.
Yes, it would. That would be the boundary, so it would be that half.
Okay,
That would be lost.
all right. And I don't know if this is a question for legal. With the parking that they have at the moment, is there anything that we could do? Is there anything in place to stop them driving over the grass as it is at the moment?
I mean,
think, yeah, Lucy.
I think it would be just for if the council were to put bollards in or something. This, it's a sort of roads issue. I don't know if Lisa's got any further comment on that.
So, Chair and councillors, I don't think it's something that I could comment on because sorry, Councillor Hendrickson, what was your question again?
I appreciate you might not be directly planning, but it could have, depending on which way we go, would they still be able to use that access anyway?
I'm not sure I can answer that question. Is there anyone from roads available, maybe, Lucy?
There isn't that I'm aware of, no. I mean, it's an informal situation, so I suppose unless the council pay and put bollards or something there to stop that happening. The driveways don't actually need permission, so it's a question of driving over the grass verge, basically. So it would be the same situation that we would have anywhere where people were driving over a verge.
Well, which means if we upheld the officer's recommendations here, they could, in theory, still keep driving over the bit of the ground that they've actually been driving over.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So I just wanted to get that.
Well, yeah, they could.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be down to maybe the local members or whatever, if residents were complaining about it and asking for those measures to be put in place. But currently the planning application is all we can do is determine whether we would allow that area to be changed. So
yes, I agree. It's just the impact of making a decision and it continuing. If you get my drift. It was anyway. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, members? Councillor Bell.
Yeah, thanks, Galina. I was going to ask this question before and it just slipped my mind. Can we look at page 150, please? Proposed site layout plan. Yeah, that's the one. So there's a lamppost shown there. What's that all about?
Is there a lamppost on the other picture?
No.
There is a lamppost, yeah.
Oops.
Well, there is in Street View anyway. You can't see it on that latest one.
So that's maybe an old one.
Yeah, I have seen a lamppost on one of the images I've looked at. I mean, it's in the corner of the site anyway. So if it requires to be moved, it would be at the applicant's cost to do that.
But it's actually
you can't see any lampposts in there.
No,
actually,
but it is in the Street View image.
I've just checked the date for the Street View, and that's
it's quite old.
2008.
Yeah, we've lost where we are.
And then I've got you moving around. Here we are. Just see the red dot just down there.
Yeah, we're It is.
Oh yeah, you can see the
Whether it's still there. That's because it's not showing on more recent.
it looks like a new one, doesn't it?
Oh.
So zoomed out again.
Right. If I go
Okay.
into 3D, I don't know, it might be.
Okay.
No, it goes back to.
Yeah.
Doesn't let us go in far enough.
No.
Not to tell.
Yeah, and as I say, when you look at the adjacent cul-de-sac, they've obviously made a little arrangement there to change the layout. I mean, there's less houses. This is 2, 4, 6, and there's no same amount of houses actually.
It's a slightly different shape.
Yeah.
So now.
And I think what they've done is they've taken away a lot more of the gardens in that other one. This one seems to have more greenery. Actually, in some ways, the layout with slimmer grass verges look better. But then the top, yeah. Okay, that's fine. Does that help, Councillor Bell?
Yes, thank you. That's super. Thank you.
Okay. Right, any other questions, members? No. Sorry, my screen's just gone blank on my... Right, so we obviously, in accordance with the procedure notes circulated, the local review body will now discuss and decide the manner in which the review is to proceed. I would highlight that all representations relating to the case has been considered and taken into account. Councillor Henriksen, do you want to go first?
Thank you, convener. I've got very mixed emotions about this one. I'm not happy with the loss of any green space as a matter of principle anywhere, unless it's really necessary. However, convener, having looked at what's happening currently at that site, I think that the quality of the green space has been degraded somewhat. And I think that the reasons I was asking about what the implications would be one way or the other, it would have an implication on the green space. And on that basis, and trying to maintain some sort of quality to the urban space, I think I might have to go with overturning the officer's recommendation to try and do something to improve the green space that's there at the moment. I hope that makes sense.
No, that's helpful. Councillor Bell.
Yeah, thank you, Camina. Well, I've got the greatest respect, as you have, for our roads department, and when they say that if that, you know, if these dryers were to be built, then potentially there could be access and egress blocked to those properties, which wouldn't be terribly clever. I'm also looking at page 149, which already has some modification made to those corner properties. You know, so the green space has already gone, part of it's already gone, sand's down. There are the yellow and black plastic edging strips down. So I think I would uphold the officer's decision and just keep the status quo as it is.
Right. Well, as we've heard, there is a confusion. I actually think that what currently exists is not safe, because we've got people driving over the grassed area. So it doesn't actually define itself as anything in particular. It's an attempt at a grassed area, but it's clearly being used as a drive over as opposed to a grassed area. So, and when I look at the neighbouring cul-de-sac, which what they've done is they've kind of partitioned the grassed areas in a way that allows it to give access over to the properties, but to remain in some sort of greenery. And whilst I'm not sure that what they're proposing is actually ideal, the principle of what they're trying to establish, I do agree with, because I think that fundamentally the status quo is not sustainable. But I think what we do need to see is perhaps a slight modification to this design. Now, we can only deal with what we have in front of us. We can't turn around and say, well, could you just make it look like the next cul-de-sac, which has the 3 bits of grass, and maybe stick a couple of trees. That's actually what I think would look an awful lot better. So it would give accessibility, or even just the central bit, a small bit with a tree in it would give, again, some improvement. So, I'm not against what they're trying to achieve. I'm just not sure that this application actually would work, because of course then you've got half a piece of grass in front of 3 other houses, which I think we're gonna end up moving to a similar. So I think I'd rather see them deal with the whole end as opposed to half an end. Now, I'm assuming the grass is in the ownership of the council, because it's on HRA, I would have thought, ground, because it's just going from looking at my own ward where we've got areas, and it looks, I'm not sure, I would say maintained, but it's obviously cut by the council. I don't know if we have any information on that, do we, Miss Green?
I did have a look at the roads overlay, and yes, I think it's grass verge, so counts as adopted road, basically owned by the council or the roads authority.
Okay, so would they need separate approval from them in terms of doing something with it?
Yes.
Even if we give them planning?
They need to get permission for crossings, unless the road authority did it itself, in which case it doesn't need planning permission at all.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So yes, that's why they commented on the surface that would be acceptable for an adopted road, who would become part of the adopted road.
I feel I'm inclined to uphold the officer's recommendation, just from the point of view, I think we've only got half an application really here in terms of what they're trying to achieve. And I'd certainly invite them to come back in with a better thought out application, because I think in principle all of us agree that the status quo doesn't work, and I think that from a safety perspective, I think, with cars going across that and it meant to be a usable piece of green space, it certainly wouldn't be, I wouldn't want to see children on that space if cars are manoeuvring around it. So I think it's got to be more defined, and I think there is an application that could come forward. So, I wouldn't want the residents to feel we hadn't understood what they're trying to achieve, but I think a more suitable design really needs to come forward that actually makes that area far more defined. I don't have a concern about the loss of parking spaces, because I think the people that will be parking there are the people that are trying to park in their drives. So, and when you see that massive piece of ground they've taken away the whole front garden and just put down concrete, and you're saying that there's no sort of planning history and people don't need driveway approvals. I would rather, refuse this currently, but I think make an indication that the LRB, if I get agreement with both my colleagues, that we would welcome a slightly better thought out application. We'd be minded that we would approve something that was maybe better thought out. Would that be a fair assumption, gentlemen? Because I think all 3 of us are struggling with what's currently in front of us, but we absolutely recognise what's being achieved. And I think in terms of safety, both for pedestrians and road users, I think that there's a better scheme there. It's just not quite there yet. Would you say that's a fair, Councillor Bell?
Yeah, that's a fair assessment, Convener. It's certainly modern living has rather overtaken what was built and something needs to be rethought, doesn't it?
Yeah. Councillor Hendrickson, would you be comfortable with that?
Yes, I would, convener. I mean, as I said, it was a difficult one for me, because it's just the environment that they're creating at the moment. I think it's not a particularly good one for the area, with bits of road being driven over, with bits of grass being driven over. So if they were to improve it, yes, I mean, yeah, because I don't think the status quo is going to, is acceptable, because it just, I mean, nothing looks worse than an area that's
one thing or another.
Yes, yeah, and and that was my that was the reason initially I was going to overturn it, because at least something would be done about it. But if we can actually go away and say, well, come back with a more considered plan, I would find that acceptable.
Okay, so as I say, we are upholding the officer's recommendation, but with a willingness, subject to a more appropriate scheme, because we do accept the principle of what's trying to be established, but we just don't feel that the current application is perhaps going to deliver the safety improvements that we think would be necessary for both pedestrian and cars. Is that sufficient for you, Ms. McBain?
Yes, I think so. That's fine.
Okay, thank you very much, folks. Right, you'll be glad to know we're on to the final application. Let me just pull up. Where's everything gone? That's it there. So now turning to consideration of the fourth review in respect to the decision to refuse the application for the formation of community sports facilities with associated fencing at hard-standing sports courts. Yes, for Martin Road, Conningham Gardens, Aberdeen, 211056. We'll now hear from the planning advisor, Ms. Lucy Green, who will provide us with a brief description of the application proposal. I would point out that Ms. Green attends today's meeting to provide us with the necessary professional planning guidance, because she's not been involved in the earlier consideration of the application under review. Ms. Green will not, however, be asked to express any merits on the proposed development. In effect, her role will be a neutral one, involving the provision of factual information and guidance only. Ms. Green.
Thank you, convener. I'll get my screen up.
Thank you.
Okay, so this review relates to refusal of an application for the formation of community sport facilities with associated fencing and hard-standing sports courts at Formartine Road and Cunningham Gardens, Tillydrone. And the review was submitted with all the necessary information within the time limit of 3 months following the decision of the appointed officer. And the applicant has indicated that there are no new matters included within the submissions, and that they would be content for the review to proceed on the basis of the information provided. So I'll provide background information before handing back to you, convener.
Thank you.
In terms of site description, that's the location plan there, showing the site within Tillydrone near to the site of the new primary school, which you can see on that plan there. And it's a rectangular area of public green open space situated on the eastern side of Formartine Road and to the south of Cunningham Gardens. And it's 67 metres by 52 metres, predominantly grassed, and incorporates 24 trees of various species and sizes, including 2 large maple trees in the northwestern corner. I'll just show you the aerial photo. So this is the site here with the 2 large maple trees in that corner. It's bounded to the north, south and west by 4-storey blocks of flats, all of which lie beyond the intervening road carriageways and residential car park to the south. and pedestrian footway delineates the eastern boundary of the site, with land beyond being developed currently with the construction of the new primary school. So I'll just move the slides on. This slide shows that's the site highlighted in yellow, and then the primary school there, just for information. That's the block plan of the proposal. So detailed planning permission is sought for the formation of the community outdoor sports facility, and there would also be fencing of various heights around the pitches. So that's the football pitch here, and this is basketball and smaller pitches here. So there would be a green coloured 42 by 28 metre Cruyff court, artificial pitch with football goals and associated perimeter ball stop fencing, which would range between 1.1 and 4 metres in height. The 4 metres would be behind the goals at either end. Basketball, dodgeball court and 2 mini tennis courts and a 40 metre long running track just at the bottom there. And they would be formed on blue coloured porous asphalt surrounding the artificial pitch. And there would be multiple benches, cycle stands and bins, and a 1.8 metre high metal mesh fencing along the north, south and western boundaries. And the pitch would be open to the public to use at all times. It wouldn't be secured and there wouldn't be a booking system. And the facility, it's noted in the case officer's report that the facility is proposed as a replacement for the previously existing sports facility that was situated approximately 150 metres to the south of the application site, but has now been developed for flats. So that's a further plan, just showing benches, the cycle stands, the pitch with the goals at either end, basketball and dodgeball and the mini tennis and running track. And that's just showing detail of the fencing that would go follow the blue lines around the edge. That shows the trees on the existing site with the 2 larger trees just in the corner there. And again, that's showing the fencing. So the green is 1.1 metre high fencing, and then this higher 4 metre high fencing around the goals. It's just an image there showing the sort of thing. And that's showing the surface of the pitch and the rest of the area. And that's showing the trees to be retained. There's 2 in the corner. And then the remainder of trees would be lost. A couple of them lost for health reasons, but the remainder lost for development. The tree survey just showing the size of trees. And you can see the 2 there. Those are the larger 2 that would be retained. So turning to the planning history, 2016, there was a certificate of lawfulness for the replacement of an existing hardcore outdoor sports facility on Catherine Street with a Cruyff Court AstroTurf. Then 2018, that was the permission granted for the 34 residential flats on the site to the south. And it was granted subject to a legal agreement, which included a requirement for the applicants to pay a contribution to the council towards the provision of a similar outdoor sports facility elsewhere in Tillydrone. And that's the port that's the subject of this application. And then the case officers also noted an application in 2019 for a Cruyff Court at Tullis Primary School. So turning to the reasons for refusal in the case officer's report. Firstly, that the proposed outdoor sports facility would adversely affect the character of the area, causing harm to residential amenity, and so it would be contrary to policy H1. And secondly, in terms of noise, it would be contrary to policy T5. So the appellant's case, they make a number of points. Firstly, that the proposal is a replacement for a previous community facility that was lost as part of another planning application. That it would satisfy the local expectation for a new free-to-use high-quality sports facility. That in terms of the tree survey, most of the trees are sort of small and young, unremarkable trees, but that the two larger ones are retained. That the proposal is of a high quality design and that the materials are visually appealing, and that they've located areas where there could be additional planting and that those could be considered by condition. In terms of noise, they've stated that the pitch would not be used in the way that the noise impact assessment looks at it. That there would be some organised sessions, but otherwise it would be free to use and it would be no different to a city play park. In terms of the urban green space policy, they note the change from existing green space to sports facility as is acceptable in principle in terms of that policy. In terms of the other policies on new community facilities, active travel, flooding and drainage, and access and informal recreation, that the proposal complies with these policies as noted in the report. In relation to design policy and the policy on tree loss, they note that additional planting is proposed, and that Scottish planning policy and the draft NPF4 are supportive in principle of this type of facility. They state that alternative sites were considered and they give reasons for this site being selected. And they say that it accords with the Tillydrone locality plan, the LOIP and the strategy for active Aberdeen. In terms of consultations, the roads department have no objection and note that the site would be accessible on foot and by bike. Environmental health object on the basis of noise, and there was a noise impact assessment submitted. It found that the proposed facility would result in likely exceedances of the relevant noise standard, which was 50 decibels measured at 1 metre from a residential building facade. So the exceedance would be of between 4 decibels and 10 decibels above the recommended limit. And they note that a 10 decibel increase in noise is perceived by the human ear as a doubling in loudness. And those properties experiencing the 60 decibel level are therefore likely to be exposed to noise levels perceived as twice as loud as the maximum noise level limit. They note that even with proposed mitigation, they would be unable to support the proposal. And that's on the basis of there being no floodlighting proposed, which I think was part of the original proposal. Tillydrone Community Council, there was no response received. And there were 3 representations in terms of noise from participants and balls striking the perimeter fencing. that there would be an excessive amount of hard surfacing created, resulting in loss of green space and harming the character of the area. There were originally floodlights proposed, and that there was an objection that they would be too bright and potentially on for all hours of day and night. There was a query about why the facility couldn't be placed further to the east on ground where the Lads Club used to be. In terms of tree loss, it was felt that all trees should be retained. And secondly, that existing trees in the northwest and southwest corners could be retained. It was felt that parking would be an issue, with more cars likely to come to the facility, exacerbating an existing shortage. It was also commented that the site should be used instead to provide additional car parking to residents. And lastly, that children or youths would abuse the facility. So I'll hand back to you, convener, now before talking further.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Green. We now need to consider whether we have sufficient information in front of us today to take a decision on the application. Members will note that the applicant has stated in the review document that no further procedure is required before determination. Members, remember that if you do not feel you have enough information to take the decision, you can request a site visit be undertaken, that further written information is provided, or a hearing be arranged. Councillor Hendrickson.
Yes, I'm fine, convener.
Okay, Councillor Bell.
Convener, yes, a site visit wouldn't be required. I have a few questions.
Yeah, equally, I'm content with the information that we've been provided with. That means we require no further procedure. So with that in mind, I will pass back to Ms. Green to go through the relevant policies and considerations.
Yeah, just one moment. Okay, so the site lies within an area zoned under policy H1, residential areas. And those first criteria are for residential use within those areas. And they look at the various criteria. I suppose of relevance is the resulting in the loss of open space and impact on the character of the area. And it says in terms of proposals for non-residential use, these will be refused unless they are considered complementary to residential use and cause no conflict with or nuisance to that residential use. In terms of urban green space, the proposal is for a recreational use, which is mentioned there in the first part of the policy. But then there are these criteria that also apply, and the most relevant ones are no significant loss to landscape character and amenity. And then there is no loss of established or mature trees. So they would be the relevant considerations in terms of that policy. Policy T5 on noise, this really states that where noise exposure is likely to be an issue, a noise impact assessment would be required, and that was submitted. In terms of policy on new community facilities, that this policy is welcoming to those. And I suppose it's notable that the existing site is a community facility, as is the proposed site. Policy NE5 on trees, and it's mainly that first point that's relevant. There's a presumption against development that would result in the loss of trees where they contribute to the nature conservation, the landscape character, local amenity. Climate change adaptation and mitigation is also a relevant factor. So landscape policy, this is really similar to the policy on trees in terms of the grassed area and trees being relevant as they contribute towards local landscape character. Policy D1 talks about good design and detailing, and there are the 6 qualities: distinctive, welcoming, safe and pleasant, easy to move around, adaptable and resource efficient. Policy T3 is also relevant, stating that sites must be acceptable by a range of transport modes. There was a drainage assessment submitted, and the policy NE6 would be relevant in consideration of that. So in terms of considerations, the site zoned under H1 policy, and does the proposal comply with the tests within that policy? And the relevant considerations really are visual amenity, loss of open space and trees, landscaping and noise. Can replacement planting mitigate for loss of trees? And in terms of design, how is the quality of design impact on the character of the area? And finally, the noise impact assessment and the findings of that. Overall, does the proposal comply with the development plan when considered as a whole, or are there material considerations that would weigh against that? Okay, thank you. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thanks very much, Ms. Green. Questions? Councillor Bell, you indicated you have some questions.
Yes, thank you, Camina. Is it possible to have a look at the further east on the former Lads Club site? I'm not suggesting that this could go there. I just wanted to get just a feel for what it looks like.
Yeah. Just find the road. It's one in. There.
I was going to say, we'll go for a swim.
Right. The Lads Club, just struggling to remember where that is now.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know that the report states that there's permission been granted on that site.
Mm-hmm.
Because immediately to the east, to the right of this site, there is going to be the primary school, isn't it? So,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So maybe it's further east of that, possibly.
That's the police station, though, I think.
Okay.
Zoom out.
Mm.
Oh, that's it. Yes, I knew it was near an application I'd dealt with.
Mm.
That's that's the lads club
Okay.
here. So I'm not sure where they mean unless
No,
it's
exactly.
here.
Yeah. But that's part of
the
Riverbank.
nursery.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that's Riverbank
Yeah.
School,
Primary
which I think we're doing something with.
Okay, so
Yeah,
so
the
so
nursery's
it's a
being built.
non-starter then, isn't it? Because
Well,
from
unless
what we can
that being
see.
that site. But certainly it's noted in the report that there's a planning permission existing on the lads club.
Yeah.
That could be what they're building.
That's the nursery there that's
Yeah.
being built.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So what? All right. I'll just ask a few other questions, if I may. So there's £209,000 available from developer contributions from construction of 34 residential flats, which planning permission was actually given in 2018. So do we know how much this facility would cost and who would actually pay the balance? Is
I
that
just
not
suppose
that's not
it's not really
particularly
relevant.
relevant?
No.
Okay. But actually, no. Okay. It's just I mean, so it'll be a community facility.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'll ask another question then. So do we know? Has there been any sort of a survey done to find out who would use it? How many would use it? Did they, did those, when they lost their facility where the 34 residential flats went, was there much, dissent? Were people very upset? I'm just wondering what the need for this is. I just trying to get a feel for what's going on here.
I mean, at the time of the application for the flats, we would have consulted the developer obligations team, who consult more widely within the council, the various services, to see what's needed in terms of community facilities, including, sports and recreation. And they would have come back and said that a sports pitch was being lost on that site and it needed to be replaced in terms, based on their work that had been carried out in that area.
Yes.
And
Okay.
often
So
Sports Scotland often as well, if you take away a facility, require a replacement so that they don't object.
okay. Right. Okay. And it'll be a very nice facility. So it'll be so there'll be no booking system. So it'll just be basically you just rock up and you turn the lights on and you play football.
Well, the statement from the applicants, because it's a Johan Cruyff court, I think the philosophy is that it's open, free access, but they did mention as well that there would be a charity street sport that had a couple of booked sessions for 2 hours during the evenings twice a week.
Okay. So going back to the on the subject of the floodlights, who do we know who would actually control them? Would they just it just
They've been removed.
They've been removed.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's not going to happen at all.
They're not part of the application, so they would have to come back in for those.
Right. Okay. Right. Super. Well, I don't think I have any other questions. Thank you.
Councillor Henriksen.
Yes, convener. I have to say, and I know quite a lot about the Cruyff courts because I got one in my ward. I don't want to really say too much about it, but it's very, very, it is good. But just with regards to the issue with the noise, surely that has there been a noise impact assessment done on the school?
Oh, on the school. Do you mean Riverbank School?
No, the new school that's being that's adjacent to the site, because I find that quite relevant, because to my mind it would be the same kind of noise.
Not sure what kind of pitch the school has.
I think they've got a 7-a-side 5G, whatever all the technical words are, but they have got a hard standing pitch to play on.
Yeah.
Because I remember it came through my capital committee, and it's some sort of 3G, 5G, wherever they are. I thought that was all to do with broadband, but never mind. Sorry, somebody keeps.
Getting back to that, what sort of noise? What sort of noise are they expecting from the site? I mean, there's a very difference between industrial type noise and children and people playing sports, I would have thought.
Yes. I mean, I can ask the environmental health officer to comment on that, but my reading of the report is that it's the properties at the end of who have or gable onto the pitch, so it's a particular sort of site specific, and it would be things like the ball hitting the fencing would be, and voices would be the things that created noise. But if you wished, I can bring the environmental health officer into the call.
Do you want to speak to environmental health? Does that help you, Del?
Yeah, that would help quite a lot. And while we're perhaps waiting, I don't know if we can ask my second question. Would it be possible to put a condition on to increase the number of trees surrounding it?
I mean, there isn't a huge amount of space around it. Let me just look at, we could.
Sorry to interrupt. It was Mark Nichols that you wanted to call in, wasn't it? I'll just.
Yes.
No, okay.
Yeah. The report does note that spaces where trees could be planted have been looked at, so that could be potentially conditioned if the application was approved.
In terms of, sorry, Del, have you got anything else? Did you say it's open 24 hours?
It just says free access, so yes, I assume that's open 24 hours. It wouldn't be closed off. There's nobody who would come and close it. So. Okay,
Del, given you've got one in your ward, you know, is that an issue in terms of amenity or?
No. If I'm allowed to describe the one at Cadden Street, that one does actually have floodlights as well, but they're on a sort of 20-minute timer, so that if there's no one there, after 20 minutes the lights go off. And I think they do actually have a limit on the night time that they can actually go on. I think it's 10 o'clock, but that will depend. I mean, that would depend on the time of year. Certainly, there was a fear that people would come in from other areas to use it, and initially that did happen, but it certainly hasn't been vandalized or anything. It's still in really, really good condition. It's really popular with the local kids. There was a bit of concern. Maybe if I start talking out of turn,
I'll stop you.
Stop me. There was initially a bit of concern from residents in Hutchin and Greg Court about the noise, and I haven't had any complaints about it at all. It is slightly different in that it's in a very sort of urban area with major roads next to it, but it's proved to be a well-used facility and a very important facility within the area.
Okay, that's helpful.
yeah, if I've overstepped anything.
No, no, that's fine. No, it's just to give, I mean, because clearly, I mean, reading the representations from some of the residents there is a concern, I think, that it could attract antisocial behaviour was, I think, the wording. And I think any sort of change, you know, can give cause for concern. And I think as well, you know, building on Mark's there now. We'll bring in Mark first. Okay, Del, do you want to ask Mark what it was you wanted to ask him about the noise assessment and the school
Yes,
stuff?
thank you, convener. I just trying to get my head around the noise assessment and what kind of noise it compares to. I mean, I know that next door to it there's the primary school being built, and that would have noise. Is that the similar sort of noise that you're expecting from the site?
Thank you, Councillor Hendrickson. Thank you, convener. Yes, well, essentially the multi-use games area that was proposed at the school, the same assessment approach was used, and the same noise criteria or noise limit level was applied in that case as was applied to this particular proposal, if that helps.
And what happened to the noise assessment for the school? Was that approved or not?
Yes, that was part of the school proposal, and that multi-use games area was accepted. The key difference with that one really was it has a condition prohibiting the there's a number of factors that differentiate it from this current proposal. It's further away from the sensitive residential receptors, and there aren't as many sensitive residential receptors. And another critical aspect is that the planning permission for that has a condition prohibiting the hours of use, so it's not open all hours.
Mm-hmm. And that one has, can I just check as well? That one has flood lighting, doesn't it? Or whatever you call it.
I'm not sure what the lighting provision at it is.
Yeah, I think it does. I'm just thinking from my capital program. I'm sure it does, but I think it's use up to 10 o'clock at night. I think that's what it was.
Okay.
Okay. Del, have you anything else that you want to? Sorry, Councillor Hendrickson.
No, nothing further.
Okay, Councillor Bell, is there anything you want to ask environmental health while we've got Mark on the call?
No, thank you. No.
Okay, thanks very much for popping into the call, Mark. Appreciate it.
That's no problem, convener. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, right. We're back. Any further questions for Ms. Green? Okay. Can I just ask, I suppose it's already been slightly touched on in terms of conditions. If we wanted to, I know that we've heard that it's open all the time, but if we wanted to restrict its hours of operation, say to 10 o'clock at night, to make it acceptable and to protect the residential amenity, would that be acceptable?
I mean, I suppose we could think about a management plan. I mean, my reading of the applicant's submission was that the Cruyff Courts, part of it was that they were open all the time. I mean, obviously, if they don't have floodlights, then at some times it's not going to be possible to use it. But
is it a Cruyff court? Sorry, I can't get the words out. Del, that you've got in your ward.
Yes, it is.
Yes,
It's the Cruyff Court, Dennis Law.
Okay, and it has restricted hours
No.
at night. I thought
No.
you said
No, the floodlights just go off. Is my
So they
understanding
can
of it.
access it at any hour of the day or
Yeah.
night?
Yes.
Okay. Right, okay, that's fine. That just gives me clarity. Sorry, I thought I misunderstood you. I thought you said it was restricted hours, but it's not. Okay. Right. And in terms of the landscaping, the trees, we could put a condition in terms of more strategically placed trees, which may give some screening or buffer, if you like.
Yes, we could. I'm not sure that screening,
Yeah.
because there isn't an awful lot of space, but in terms of mitigating the loss of trees, there have been areas identified.
Okay, that's helpful. All right, thank you very much, Ms. Green. Right, members, obviously, we've done our questions from Ms. Green, so now we need, in accordance with the procedure note circulated, to discuss and decide the manner and how the review is to proceed. I would highlight that all representations relating to the case have been considered and taken into account. Del, do you want to kick off with this one first?
Yeah,
That's no pun intended there. Just realised. Sorry.
For me, convener, I think the loss of any sports facilities within an area is really they're really important to replace. I understand the concerns about the noise impact. However, I think on the whole, I'm not quite sure which policy it is, but improving the place. I think that this would have a really good benefit for all sorts of things within the local area that would perhaps outdo the potential noise impact assessment. So I'll be recommending that we overturn the officer's decision.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bell.
Well, it's a difficult one. I think, as Councillor Henriksen says, for young people losing these sorts of facilities, it's it really it's very bad, and having this sort of facility is very good. I do have reservations, though, that if it became popular in the winter time when we have very limited daylight hours, then there would be a need for floodlighting to actually, so that the facility could be used. And then it's a question of, well, who would actually pay for the floodlighting? I know that's not relevant to this application, but kind of these are all questions though that I would ask, or that that would be swirling around in my mind, as it were. But I think the principle of actually having the facility in the area is a very good principle, and I would, for that reason, I would also advocate overturning the officer's recommendation and allow this to go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bell. I think we're all acutely aware that for many people it's important to have sport facilities, both from a mental and a physical well-being for our young people. But also, not just young people, anybody can use it, and I think that's what's important to recognise. It could encourage, closer ties within the community, particularly with incomers to the community. So there's lots of elements that actually, if you like, weigh in favour of the development. I mean, I do have a level of understanding living next door to a school and a football pitch. That there can be periods of times where the noise, but they could be playing sport on the grass facilities at the moment that exists. And I think when we're looking at our policy CF2 new community facilities, I've heard a lot of good reports about the one up in Torry as well, and that that actually it's given the youth in particular a kind of an ownership and pride, and they actually police it really well themselves. I know that there's a number of community groups that want to arrange different sessions on this site. I do have concerns when we lose any trees, but we've heard that there can be a condition to make sure some more trees are installed, because I think it's really important to make the character of the area softer when you've got fencing and things like that in place. So I think it's important that we do have the trees replaced as much as possible and retain the two larger ones at the corner site. You know, obviously this has been put in place on the back of an approval of another site to replace the community facilities there. I think it is central enough that most people, I don't think it will see a huge impact in terms of car usage. I think most people will use active means to get to the scheme, and that's what's really important when it becomes a community facility. So, you know, as not dismissing the obviously concerns of residents, and not just dismissing the noise impact assessment outright. I think on balance, I think these things will settle down. And I think we heard from Councillor Hendrickson. He had also had concerns raised in his own ward. And as I say, living next door to a facility that, and I've got the sports centre behind me. I forgot that. You know, so you know, you know, most people would probably throw their hands up in horror, but actually, you become used to your surroundings, and I think most people are generally respectful of it. And I think that this will play an important part for the daily life of the community, and also with the new school next door to it. I think it can become, you know, valuable for them to use as well. So, you know, like yourselves, I would be moving to overturn the officer's recommendations. Ms. Green, can you maybe give us any other suggestions in terms of conditions that you believe are required?
I mean, I think we've got details of the materials that would be needed. I've just got the tree protection and tree planting condition. I don't think there's anything else that I can think of.
No. Okay. As I say, I mean, within our pack, there was a lot of information from Street Sports and Johan Cruyff Foundation, the Dennis Legacy Trust, and also importantly from the community itself. And I think what was quite a startling statistic for me was the fact that almost 25% of the population in the area are under 16. So, and they had a little vote on what they wanted to see on the site. So hopefully, because they've been included at the very start, they'll feel a greater ownership for it. And that, you know, if there's any issues that, again, I think a management plan in terms of having contacts, if there's issues, Lucy, can we put something around that so that if there's issues that arise, that there's some sort of management plan that can be deal with it?
Management plan that would include contacts with.
Yeah. It's just to try and give reassurance to the residents that live close by, if there is a contact, because often these things spring up and nobody knows who to go to, because it's not strictly a council facility, it's a community facility that the council's been involved in. So it's about making sure that there is a point of contact. I think that's quite important. I don't know how it works in your own ward, Councillor Hendrickson.
I'm not sure, Convener. I certainly know that the facility's been there a few years now, and I don't. There's certainly been no reports that I've had that there's been any sort of major damage or anything. It's genuinely looked
But
at.
in terms of contacts, is there anybody in particular that's identified as a contact?
Not that I know of. I suppose if Street Sport were organising something, they could be responsible for, if they're having a number of sessions in an evening, they would be one to get in contact, and possibly the Dennis Law Legacy Trust as well, who put it in place.
Okay, so if we can see if we can get some information put into sort of the management plan, I think that would be helpful, because I think when you've got a number of different partners involved, so trying to nail anybody down can be quite challenging. So, but again, there's a lot of community planning goes on in that area too. So I'm sure there must be a lot of officers that might be involved. So if we could maybe just try and tie something down in a management plan that would give any residents that needed contacts the ability to contact someone.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Right, Lindsay, anything else you require from us?
No, that's fine. So you've unanimously voted to approve the application with the conditions that you just discussed
Yeah.
to do with tree planting. Yeah.
Yeah, and the management plan.
Management plan, sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, members. Well, now, Lindsay, is this the last LRB?
Yeah, that's it till June.
Okay, sorry, I see Lisa's got her hand up. Lisa.
Yes, Chair and councillors, it was just to say that I've written down that in relation to policies, you know, D1 would outweigh, you know, the noise implications, and another policy I wrote down was CF2, so maybe it's worth putting those in.
Yeah. Well, I mentioned it in my discussion. Sorry, and also there was the tree. I've written on my notepad now, can't find it. Yeah, I'd said obviously the NE3 and it was CF2 and
NE5, I think.
NE5, thank you. And D1, we recognised it was a good quality design.
Thank you, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Any more for any more? Oh, is that us? Okay, well, thank you very much. And Lucy, thank you. I know it's been a short period with us as on the LRB, but there will be another lot replacing us.
Yes.
I don't know who it is yet, but no, thank you all very much for your participation. And that's, you know,